This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
President Bola Tinubu has signed an amendment of the Electricity Act into law. The amendment addresses the development and environmental concerns of host communities. It also mandates 5% of the actual annual operating expenditures of power generating companies, that's GENCOs, from their preceding year for the development of these respective host communities. These funds will be managed by a trustee or manager jointly appointed by the GENCO and the host community. How will this amendment impact these communities? Well, we're joined by the team lead of Platform Africa, Mr. Adeola Yusuf, who offers answers. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Yusuf.
It's my pleasure to be on the program this morning.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Let's start off with this latest, just your reaction to this amendment that's been included.
Okay, thank you so much. We don't need to bother or to burden, our listeners about challenges of electricity supply in Nigeria. Everyone knows that. A lot of people are likely to be listening to us, via alternative sources of electricity. So that's established. But there has been, effort to make sure that Nigeria electricity supply is stabilized. And despite all the efforts, it was discovered that foundationally, the law guiding the Nigerian electricity supply market, is not harmonized. And what I mean by not harmonized is that we have a lot of different laws, and there has been need for all the laws to be in a pool, so that there could be, it can be handy, so that every partakers, every actors in the electricity supply or distribution or generation market will have something handy. So that has been the law. So in 2023, that was passed, and there has been this back and forth about need for amendments. But few days ago, the president Bola Ahmed Tinubu was able to sign that law. So what that law is to do in about 2 or 3 ways categorically. Number one is to harmonize all the electricity laws, regulations. Then number two is to ensure the monopoly. What I mean is to ensure the destruction of the monopoly. I mean by that is that that before now, everything about electricity is domiciled with the federal government. A lot of states in the country, the 36 of them, have been battling, anytime there is an issue of electricity, everything will still be on the neck of the state.
Yes, and this was what the initial, when the Electricity Act was signed last year, this is what it then addressed. But this amendment now, one of the clauses added was to the host communities as well. There are 24 GENCOs, so we're talking about possibly 24 host communities.
Yes.
Speak to us about that 5% mandated for their development, how it will affect the GENCOs and the communities.
Okay, thank you so much. You know that part of the major challenges we have when it comes to infrastructure in the country is they call it vandalism or vandalization. And a lot of observers and researchers have discovered that most times the host community, those that are playing host to those infrastructure, don't see it as their own. And there has been that clamor to ensure that there should be shareholding. Be it in terms of monetary or in terms of a value or whatsoever, by the host community. So what this law is to do is to make sure that all the infrastructure that are domiciled in the community are seen by those communities that belong to them. And how do they do that? Is to ensure that there is that shareholding, members of the community. Remember that all the power infrastructure, be it poles, be it transformer, be it even substation, everything passes through communities, and most of them are domiciled in communities. So it is going to be very, very good in terms of helping in security and of those infrastructure. Number one. Then number two, remember that anytime we have issues with security, it affects the new generation. So when that issue, when the whole about security is plugged, definitely there's going to be, surge in the new generation of GENCOs. And at the end of the day, remember that, this electricity we are talking about is something that once it's generated, and once it's generated cannot be stored. It must be used. But then if it's not used, it's wasted. So if most times that generation we generate a lot and we are not able to, due to vandalism of infrastructure, supply that, individuals and all that, that is going to be, stopped by this new venture or venture. So
right,
it's something
Mr.
that
Yusuf.
is a win-win situation for every, partakers in that entire value chain.
Mr. Yusuf, thank you very much for speaking with us this morning. We do apologize, but we have run out of time. To go on with the conversation this morning, we spoke with Mr. Adeola Yusuf, talking about the President of Nigeria signing an amendment to the Electricity Act bill that will benefit GenCos in the country as well as the host communities.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Newsmaker. Our newsmaker today is Mr. Funsho Doherty. Mr. Doherty has a background in business and extensive work experience spanning 2 decades in the private sector. He was the 2023 governorship candidate of the African Democratic Congress in the Lagos State gubernatorial elections, and though Mr. Doherty lost the election, he has remained within the fray of politics and governance. In his attempt to redefine what it means to be in opposition within Nigeria's political space, Mr. Doherty has been vocal about the need for transparency in the utilization of public funds, especially in Lagos State. He joins us in the studio now. Mr. Doherty, thank you for joining us on this conversation.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me, Steve. Hi, Nabila. It's good to be
morning,
here.
Mr. Doherty. It's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You've been busy since the elections ended, and particularly so since the swearing in second term for the current governor. You've been paying close attention to some of the projects that Lagos State has either embarked upon, planned to embark upon, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. You've even paid attention to the president's, the governor's, I call it his dalliance with, what was the island nation again?
Grenada.
Right? Grenada. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, you've been quite busy.
Well, so they tell me. I guess I've just been paying attention, that's all. And speaking about things that strike me.
And let's start off there, right, with the things that strike you. Again, you've touched on a few things, but I want you to sum it up for us, right? What really strikes a chord with you when you look at Lagos State and the governance approach so far?
So I think that the most significant thing for me in Lagos has not changed, and that's the fact that Lagos has a lot of potential, far more than perhaps many of the other states, and has typically tended to compare itself to other states that are far less, endowed with resources. And we have always felt that Lagos can do a lot more with its potential, and that where Lagos is falling short, basically is around leadership, it's around governance, and it's around the management of resources. So if you look at some of the things that we've talked about, they speak to this when we talk about the efficiency of the use of government resources, when we look, for example, at the public procurement processes, some of the questions that we raised, which they caught the attention of the public and kind of went viral on social media. And it tells you also that these are the things that people themselves care about, right? And by the way, this is a trend and a phenomenon that is not just specific to Lagos, right? So we're seeing it nationally, and you'll see that there's all this debate around, the cost of governance and whether the leaders' interests are aligned and how they're using the people's resources for the benefit of the people. So I think that if I had to pick out one area, I think in Lagos where we could do a lot more, I would say it's in this area of governance, this area of managing the resources for the benefit of the people, and managing the economy in a much more inclusive rather than an extractive way.
That's a interesting point to make, inclusive rather than extractive. And you're saying this now. We're also have had discussions as recent as this morning talking about what the states need to start doing, whether or not they should look at efforts to improve the welfare of workers in the state beyond just waiting for the national minimum wage to come into play. A state like Lagos is described as a mega city. It's on that same word is used to describe places like Cairo, Shanghai, Tokyo, and so on and so forth. What are we really doing wrong in Lagos State, given the potential that we have?
So there are a number of things. First is that we point to Lagos State's population. If depending on who you ask, between 20-30 million is the figure the figures that are thrown out there. Now, one way of looking at this population is to think of it as a liability, right? Because we have to cater for all of these people. But I think we need to fundamentally revisit that mindset and think of the people as an engine, right, of prosperity. And if we can empower the people through proper education, and not just formal education, but also vocational education, and give them the tools, then the people themselves can become engines of prosperity and drive the prosperity that is needed to cater for them. Right, so I think that is important. It's a fundamental mindset rather than looking at what we can get from these people. Beyond that, I think that a government needs to work constantly in the interest of the people. Governance is not easy, and there's no way in government there's almost no government you can point to across the world that says they have more resources than they can use. I mean, the resources are always going to be scarce. So it's a question of how you, in a position of leadership and authority, create your preferences, your priorities, and make the people a priority. Part of that is ensuring that the government is working. The government, by government I mean elected officials, public servants, and civil servants, right? They are the ones that deliver the policies, that do that actually carry out, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whatever it may be, on behalf of the people. And if they are acting in self-interest or invested interest rather than in the interests of the people, over time, what is going to happen is that resources will be extracted into the hands of a few, and the many will become impoverished. And I think we've seen this, and it's actually not just a phenomenon, again, in Lagos. I think it's a governance phenomenon that we've struggled with as a nation. I think I might add that, just in conclusion, that one element of fixing this problem, whether we like it or not, is the compensation of public officers and civil servants. Because we have to be truthful, we have to be sincere. And if you don't pay people a living wage and you put them in positions of authority and give them huge powers, they can act as toll gates and essentially create their income from the work that they do. Again, which is to the detriment of the people.
So, Mr. Doherty, I mean, it's interesting you say this because it's been said before, right? And there is the criticism that when you're outside government, you think that it is as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Then you get into the hallways of power and you realize that it is actual rocket science. You continue to talk about centering the people, and I'm curious about who the people are, especially with a Lagos definition. You recently wrote an open letter that was addressed to the state government, especially around the activities of the Commissioner for Environment, Tokunbo Wahab, the ban on styrofoams and single-use plastics. More recently, he's also given an order for an enforcement of people who cross highways illegally, and has insisted that people should use pedestrian bridges. Even though there are a number of roads, I think about the Bagada Warren-Shoki Apapa Express, that expressway, right? There's just 2 pedestrian bridges, and that's a very long bridge before you get to that junction that takes you to Ikorodu Road. So I'm curious about what the definition of the people happens to be in a place like Lagos, where the urban, high class, middle class, upper class people seem to be the greatest beneficiaries of governance?
Yeah. So, a couple of points in what you've said. I think the first, to start off where you started off, is government. I think it's not rocket science. I have not said it's easy, but I don't think it's rocket science. And I think that nobody is saying that nobody expects that it's easy, right? But that's why people take the job. That's why you are elected to do the job. And by the way, other societies have done it and have succeeded in doing it. So I think it cannot be the case that we continue to excuse poor performance or underperformance with the idea that, you are not here so you don't know how difficult it is, right? So that's the first point. Now, secondly, with respect to the people, I think this speaks to the very heart of what I was talking about, so the extractive versus the inclusive, right? The people are the people. It's everybody. Okay? So it's not only the privileged, but it's the underprivileged as well, right? And when we make policies, we have to think about how they impact not just the rich, but we have to think about how they impact the poor. We have to think about how they impact the middle class, how they impact the children, how they impact mothers, the entire gamut of society. So let me give you an example. If you take the ban on single-use plastics, for example, and styrofoam, I mean, we all understand the detriment that these things have for our environment, right? So nobody quarrels with the idea that we need to phase these things out of our economy. One of the things that we have said, for example, is that how do you just make a pronouncement on one day that it's banned, and if you're using it you're going to get fined and so on and so. You can't make that in one day. Secondly, the use of single-use plastics, have we even defined for the people what we mean when we say single-use plastics are banned, right? Because it's not a common definition all over the world. Are PET bottles, for example, part of it? Sachet water, this so-called pure water, is it part of it? In a city like Lagos, where we do not have pipe-borne water across much of the state, maybe most of the state, many people rely on this for their daily consumption of water. So you have to let people know what you mean, give them a path to comply. If really what you're trying to do is to get people to comply and to move things in the direction you want, not just to have an opportunity to find people who are not doing the right thing, then you will do it in a way that gives them the opportunity to comply without complicating their lives beyond what they have the capacity to cope with.
Mr. Doherty, your interest in governance is not just limited to Lagos State. You've also talked about what's happening at the federal level. In plain man terms, the relationship between the naira and the dollar has been a headache. We're still trying to unravel where it went wrong, who is culpable, and so on and so forth. Can you talk to us about the questions that you are raising regarding foreign exchange, what the banks are doing, where the CBN comes in, and what sort of response you're expecting now that you have once again written, about these issues that I guess we can say is affecting every Nigerian in different ways?
Yeah. So, we wrote a letter on this a few days ago. And, obviously, the whole foreign exchange thing, banks are central to it. I do want to note, to start off with, that the banking industry and maybe the entire country are mourning the loss of one of their most significant leaders over the weekend. And we just remember the family in our prayers, and our thoughts and prayers are with them. The questions we raised with respect to the foreign exchange really has to do with some of the recent developments. Of course, we all know the trajectory of the naira versus the dollar over the last maybe year or 18 months, right? It's been a precipitous decline. But most recently, in the past, I would say, couple of weeks, specifically at the end of last month, we saw certain developments. So there was a circular from the CBN which confirmed that banks had been holding billions of dollars in foreign currency over and above the regulatory limits that they have, which effectively means that the banks are speculating against the naira. CBN issued a directive that they should basically unwind those positions. Now, at the same time that happened, we saw on the NAFEM market, the rate moved up sharply. And this was coincident with the directive to the banks to offload those positions. Now, by the way, it's important to remember that the NAFEM rate is set by an institution called the FMDQ, which is a self-regulatory organization which is a majority owned by the banks themselves. So the question we raised was just to say that, look, we think this is something that needs to be examined. Given the fact pattern that we've seen, there suggests that light needs to be shed on this so that we can understand why, in the first place, the banks were allowed to accumulate so much speculative position against the naira, to why, when they were asked to offload those positions, the rate at which they were going to offload them suddenly went sharply higher, given the dynamics of that market structure and how the prices are made, and the fact that the banks are all involved in the ownership of the price setting mechanism, and what is the role of the CBN and so on. So these are questions that we need to look into. The reason it's important is that this activity, if it is proper or if it is improper, the effect will end up in the foreign exchange rate. And who bears the burden of the foreign exchange rate? Ultimately, it is the average citizen who has to buy goods and services, many of which have foreign input, many of which are imported. And the purchasing power of the people declines precipitously as a result of any increase in the foreign exchange rate. So I think we should not pay attention to these developments. We should not be unaware. We should not assume that everything is being done correctly, particularly when the institutions that are at the heart of the system are making hundreds of billions from speculative activity associated with the forex rate.
So, Mr. Doherty, we've got maybe 3 minutes to go, and I want to bring it back to a more personal angle. You turning to the center with your latest letter, is it a precursor to you? Yes, and certainly
running
have to ask
president?
the question. Well, maybe not. But there is a real question around the future of your politics, whether it's even at Lagos, in Lagos, or if it's at the center, and then also your party, the ADC. We still have to have critical conversations around its chances at clinching a seat at whatever level. So talk to us about that.
All right, good question. I mean, many of those things will unfold in the future, and we don't see the future. But I'll speak a little bit to that. First of all, this issue that is national is also actually very germane for Lagos State, and actually that's one of the reasons why I spoke about it. Lagos State, as you might know, has foreign borrowings of about $1.2 billion. So when the rate goes north, it costs Lagosians a lot of money. So just in 3 days alone, this movement cost Lagos 650 billion naira based on the dollars that we owe. So it's not academic for Lagos State. But beyond that, I think the question you raised, what is clear is that I remain engaged. I remain engaged politically. When I make these comments, I'm not making them just as an academic, right? So I'm a politician. And I try to be factual in what I'm doing, but I think it's important to be clear that that I'm a politician. Now, with respect to the question about the party, I think that what I would say is that I remain a card-carrying member of ADC at this time. What is clear is that the political terrain is itself evolving, and that we will see how that will evolve over the next maybe 12, maybe 18 months. And ultimately, what that portends for, my party affiliation and all of that is something that will unfold.
Well, Mr. Doherty, the time that we have today is definitely not enough for the conversations that we intend to have.
But he does leave us with a political answer. maybe not.
It's a good place to hang it, but we do hope that we can get to talk to you extensively in the near future to look at some of the issues that have come up, some of the issues that you've addressed,
sure.
As well as, we have to be honest, some of the issues that will come up. It's yes. Nigeria. We have issues every day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Our newsmaker this morning, Mr. Funsho Doherty, the 2023 candidate of the ADC, running for governor. He did run for governor. Even though he lost that election, he still remains interested in Lagos State and indeed, as we can say, Nigeria's continued success. Do stay with us as Now Breakfast continues with Community Watch in just a moment.